Hello.
Hi. Okay, now I can hear now.
Very good. Welcome.
Thank you. You are Vicky, right?
Yes, very nice to meet you. We're just
Nice to
getting
meet
set
you
up.
too.
Thank you.
It's my first time.
Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. Live from Silicon Valley, California. This is Success Sadhana. My name is JM, and I welcome you all to a program today where we'll discuss a new topic. We humans are sponges. What are we absorbing? With our speaker today, Vaish, a veteran Bhakti yogi, author, and former monk. We have around 15 members on Zoom and a dozen members on Facebook. Thanks so much, Vaish. Looking forward to a session on Success Sadhana today. Thanks for coming back.
Yeah, thanks for letting me back. I'm wandering all over the place, and it's nice to have a place to come back to. And that's one of the main aspects of balance in life I've been discovering and talking about is that we're never still, but there's a way in which we know how to pull back to the center, even though there's a way in which we get pulled from one side to another quite naturally. So thank you, Jam, for keeping this space open. Good to see you all here today. It's just a little time together, which I find can always make a difference when we're taking time to discuss which ways we can increase our potential for our lives. And being involved with the ancient wisdom literatures and some of the great teachers who have represented those literatures over the years, I've been amazed at how even one simple idea applied can help to improve my life. And therefore, I've spent a good portion of my life collecting those ideas from great thinkers. Although I'm not a great thinker myself, sometimes I'm able to collect great ideas. And my intention here really is to pass them on in case some of them fit you. And I try to do it in a context that presents holistic lifestyle changes. So all of us have a lot going on. We all come from different contexts and so forth. And these are just suggestions, things that you can add to your life if they seem to fit, and try them on for size. So I see some new faces here. Welcome. Thanks for coming. We will start off today. Yes, please go ahead.
No, nothing.
Hi, Betty. Thanks for coming. Good to have you here.
Thank you. Just thank you.
And by the way, it's okay for those of you who can, you can keep your camera on. I just want you, either way is fine. I'm used to talking into a void. I've had sessions where no cameras were on. But I meet people later when I travel and people come up to me and say, I heard that show. And I was like, wow, it's nice to know somebody was there listening. So I do have a sense that it's not going into a void and that you're all out there. And that's part of that's one of the themes today, is how we absorb what we hear. We absorb so much from our environment. And especially if we're deliberately trying to pick things up and we're here to hear. Okay, so I was reading in the Srimad Bhagavatam, one of the ancient wisdom literatures, about the power of sound and the power of what's called raga. There's a way in which we're tuned to a particular kind of melody. Raga is something like a melody in Indian music. And what the Srimad Bhagavatam says is that we're driven by that kind of song that we have. In fact, it's our original spiritual nature is musical. Not that we are music, but that we have a resonance with a certain kind of scale, with certain kind of music. And there's another aspect of this ancient wisdom culture, and that is that sound itself is the determinant of our consciousness. What kind of sound we take in will determine how our consciousness develops. And of course, the quality of our consciousness determines the quality of our life. So we perceive everything through the instruments of our minds, and we use our intelligence to sort out what's important, what's not important. And if the intelligence is warped, then we find a warped way to live. So just as a beginning, an introduction, an opening, a preface to our session today, I'm going to play a little raga. And I'm switching over to original sound for musicians, and I'm going to turn on some raga. And there it is. So if you'd like, because we can as humans to decide to do this, try sitting up a little straighter than you were a second ago, and maybe close your eyes. Many of the wisdom literatures are called nigama. Gama means to go and ni means within. Their contention is that there's a universe, an unlimited variety of elements to explore within our inner world. And I often don't visit that place. I'm focused externally. So just with the few minutes that we have, try bringing your awareness to your breath and breathe naturally, but just bring your focus to your breath and relax. But keep an alert mind. And as you're breathing, add an element of gratitude that you can breathe. Gratitude brings in a sense of intention in the universe, because we can't have gratitude for something impersonal. there has to be intention, and intention means person. So the wisdom literatures say that there's an intention behind the universe. That means there's an intelligence behind it. It means there's a personal touch. Ever notice when we're breathing, every cell in our body is also breathing, and all the organs in our body are working together harmoniously, just as all systems in the universe are working harmoniously at every second. Subtler laws of the universe, like the law of action and reaction, everything has its effect. And it's there for a benevolent purpose to help guide us to integrity, full integrity. As we're breathing, relaxing, and just focus on the concept that we're being maintained. The fact is, we can't stop breathing. If we do, we'll be forced to breathe again. Heart's going on beyond our control. The whole universe is going on beyond our control. But we do have a place in it all. We're the consciousness within the body. Body is a vehicle. In the ancient wisdom literature say the human body is especially equipped for discovery of one's consciousness. And the second quality recommended to cultivate in the wisdom literatures is humility. We know much less about everything than we think. And that's okay. If we admit that we're not the supreme controllers, can actually be more effective. So see if you can breathe in, sense of gratitude, and see if you can feel in your solar plexus a sense of humility. Two substances mixed together make the world a place of discovery, says the Bhagavad Gita. And just take a few more breaths. Relish the fact that at any moment you can resort to your perspective as a conscious being within a body that's moving, breathing beyond your control to a large extent, and a universe that's going on, perfectly ordered. And we can learn to come more and more into resonance with the purpose of the universe. And if you like, rub your hands together, open your eyes, and we'll come back into the Zoom room. And today I'll be talking about something very practical. I find it very practical myself because there are so many people that I want to be with or that I can be around, We can deliberately find certain types of people to be around. We can also deliberately avoid certain types of people. And there's also obviously sound in our environment. I've called it before a soundscape. That's not an original phrase, obviously, but in relationship to our own lives, it can be useful to think about what is our own soundscape. And this all goes to the theme of today's thought process, which is, as I'm reading the first page, it says, we humans are sponges. What are we absorbing? So these are topics, ideas for discussion. I'm going to bring up a few of them and then invite your reflections. Reflections means anything you hear that sounds useful, interesting, that generates a question. Please feel free. It's a free room here. So, looking, JM, to our slide deck, first slide says we are sponge-like. And these next few points come from yoga psychology. Where do we find the most detail in yoga psychology? It's from a book written thousands of years ago by an author named Patanjali Muni. Muni is a designation, kind of like professor, one who dedicates his or her life to high thinking. Muni, Patanjali Muni. And Patanjali Muni wrote the Yoga Sutras, which I found infinitely helpful. As we get one mind, might as well make the most of it. And that's really the subject of his book. It's how to deal with your own mind. My father was a psychologist. Our house was a library, basically. And there's so many books by so many thinkers I remember seeing as a child on the mind and how it works, many different theories. This goes into some very practical points. Patanjali Muni starts off his book by saying that the mind has vrittis, turnings. Vritti means to turn. The mind turns in various ways. But why does it turn in certain ways? And how can you get it to turn the way you want it to turn? And one of the main points he makes at the beginning of the book is that our minds are sponge-like. Just remembering that is so important for me, as I know that whatever I'm exposing myself to, I'm going to soak up. It's part of the human experience. There's a good side to that, and there can also be a detrimental side. Good side is because we're so porous, we're so vulnerable as humans, we can take in the best of association and get great benefit from it. We can take in the best of sound vibrations and find ourselves improved almost immediately. That's why some of the ancient wisdom literatures give these directives that if you do this very quickly, you will experience the result. And we are basically exposed to our environment. And Patanjali Muni gives this very interesting concept. It's not exclusive to his writings. They're there throughout all the ancient wisdom literatures on yoga and meditation, called samskars. It's easy to remember because it sounds like samskar, like SOMESKAR, like you have some scar. We know that if we cut ourselves, we can be left with a scar. I mean, when I was a little kid, I had a hamster and it was in a little cage in my room, and I bumped into the cage and it left a little mark on my leg. Still there, same body, 65 years later, and the thing's still there. That's a scar, SCAR. And this word samskar means that psychologically we're vulnerable to whatever kinds of environments we're in, and that might include the well, I'll go into what it includes later, but right now, talking about samskars, one of the ways that it's defined, I love this phraseology, vibrant, latent impulses. So latent means, I'll tell you what latent means. I have my dictionary open, I always have it open. Latent means of a quality or state existing but not yet developed or manifest, hidden or concealed. So latent means it's there. The impulse we take in. Vibrancy means that, what does it mean? For something to be vibrant. You think you know words and then you look and say, I had no idea it meant that. Vibrant comes from Latin, shaking to and fro. To vibrate. It means it has energy, really is what it means. And then impulse, wait, let's make sure that's not redundant. I don't think it is. Impulse. An impulse is sudden, strong, or unreflective urge. Isn't that interesting? Unreflective. Did you think about it? No, it was unreflective. I just did it. Urge or desire to act. So here we have these three words together. Let's listen to them again and see what you think. Samskars, a definition in three words: vibrant, latent impulses. So vibrant in that they have their own force, energy. Latent is that they can lie dormant for a while and they can come out of latency as an impulse. That's why sometimes you don't know. They're all in there and you might be triggered in a certain way. And Patanjali Muni describes, actually, he doesn't describe so much. His book is Sutras. Sutras means he just says the bare minimum. Other thinkers have expanded upon this over many centuries. And so there's a way in which we collect all that comes into our ears, our eyes, in our purview. We're taking in all kinds of sensory stimuli. And these they're recorded, basically. It's all in there. But then they have their own energy. They may be not activated yet, therefore they're latent. And then they can then manifest as an impulse, which means do this now. And so Patanjali Muni's contention is that we have groves of these samskars. Groves. Groves means it's so thick in our consciousness and in our subconsciousness. We're not even aware what's in there. And I take it for granted that I have certain predispositions. I'm predisposed to certain environments or people or ideologies. I'm predisposed. That's because of, according to Patanjali's yoga psychology, the influences I've experienced. And we have likes and dislikes. Do you like asparagus? I used to not, but now I do. It has a lot to do with, well, my wife's cooking, but I think I was maybe brainwashed by my older brother who hated asparagus, and because he hated it, I thought I did too. Point is, it's granular. People might say, well, I like this kind of music. I don't like that kind of music. From any higher perspective, we may notice the fact that these likes and dislikes are superfluous to our core, to our being. As an example, I once heard an interview with a music critic, highly trained in music. Her ear was tuned. She would go and hear classical music, and she then was in a car accident and almost lost her life, had a near-death experience, came back, and she was talking to the interviewer and said that her perspective on music had changed. She said, I used to be a snob. I considered anybody who didn't like a particular genre of music to be less intelligent. And then she said, but now I just appreciate the sound vibration of any kind of music because it's more of an existential experience. And she said, I even like elevator music. Different perspective. So potentially Mooney's inviting us to be aware of the fact that one, whatever we're exposing ourselves to has an effect. And two, that it's creating our state of mind, our likes and dislikes, our predisposition towards the world. That's where it comes from. In fact, we might have heard, that sounds funny, we might have heard, I have heard of a psychological description of a phenomenon called radicalization. There's ways in which people become radicalized in certain ideology they get exposed to, like as an example, sometimes people associate with others online, and at first they have a neutral point of view or an opposite point of view, and by associating with a particular website and with chat rooms and things like that, then they become adamant about a particular position. Adamant practically is a euphemism. When we're talking about radicalization, people then feel compelled to express their opinion, even in violent ways. Radicalization comes under that umbrella. So how did that happen? By association, what you heard, who you associated with, and so forth. So Patanjali Muni is saying that whatever situation we're in now, whatever we like or don't like, it's because of what we've taken in, the association we've had. Okay, so there's a concept. I've given the basic idea behind it. Let's hear what your reactions are. Oh, look,
Yeah.
there's already something in the chat box. I'm so excited. Thank you. Okay, go
Zila
ahead,
said,
JM.
yeah. So Zila said that when I go for a walk and feel my energy is low, if I listen to music, my energy increases a lot.
It's so true, isn't it? Yeah, it goes back to also the very beginning of this session we had today regarding raga, tune, music. We become energized by the sounds that we hear, and there are certain kinds of music, sound vibration that induce particular kinds of feelings. Some can be uplifting, some can make us thoughtful, even sad.
Please unmute and share your reflections, questions.
Sharing means caring. Okay.
Janki just posted, does a person's ability to absorb from the environment differ from person to person? Are some more sensitive than others?
Some are more sensitive and selective. Yes, and I'll explain why. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna talks about the ways in which we're affected by the environment of the world. He describes this world, the environment we're in now, as being made up of a lower energy than ourselves. And he distinguishes between lower energy and higher energy. As a very simple example, my teacher used to use is that if you put a rock in one place and you come back in a million years, minus any environmental influences, it'll still be there. It doesn't have its own volition, and it doesn't move on its own. Whereas any living being, like a bug, the other day, I was sitting at a table with a very white tablecloth, and I saw the tiniest bug I've ever seen in my life. It looked like a period using That is at the end of a sentence from using the smallest tipped pen you can possibly use. That's how big it was. But it was responsive to my suggestion that it not stay in a certain area. I was concerned for its welfare because I thought if you stay here, somebody's going to put something on top of you and it doesn't look like you're robust enough to handle that. So why don't you move? And he responded because he's a conscious entity, albeit the tiniest bug I've ever seen in my life. So this is the distinction. There's a rock, and then there's a conscious being. The conscious being moves and is responsive. That's the power of consciousness, which is amazing. And so the conscious being, says Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, has body, mind. We have that apparatus. We call this body. And the body gets influenced by three modalities. There's goodness, passion, ignorance, sattva, rajas, tamas. Each one of them has its own quality, obviously. Coming to answer your question in this context is that when you're in the higher modality, when you've cultured the higher modality called sattva, you're more sensitive, you're more aware of what's happening, you'll be more discriminating because you know that there's a result from everything that you take in. And in the lower modes, you become much less sensitive. For instance, in the mode of ignorance, you don't know what you're doing as much. Sometimes when people are very intoxicated, they do crazy stuff. That's a typical example of ignorance, is when you become inebriated by some foreign chemical. And then you don't interact with the world in a reasonable way, and you're also less sensitive than others. And if you, even without the chemicals, the lower modes of nature make you less sensitive. So in fact, in one of the commentaries to this book, the Yoga Sutras, which I read extensively over the pandemic, underlined almost every sentence. Some of the commentary talks about how yogis become, as one commentator said, as sensitive as an eyeball. I was like, what's that about? It explains that eyeball is so sensitive that we try to protect it. Eyelid closes before anything gets close to it. And he says those who are cultivating their consciousness and elevating their consciousness are so aware they're aware of the power of influences that they're protective. They're really careful about what they let in. So they're more sensitive in that sense. Well, that was a great question. Thanks. And let's see if anybody has any more comments in general or specific about anything that we talked about. Look, we have Mukharavind, one of my favorite contributors to this show.
Thank you so much. I was just was so fascinated by this concept that you're talking about samskar, because yesterday I visited some store, Indian store, and I was doing shopping, and then in the background they were playing some Bollywood music, and it was all going okay, it's fine. I was good familiar, okay, I heard somewhere, but the surprise thing happened when I got up this morning, and then that song is still ringing, and still though I didn't wanted to pay any attention when I was shopping, but still that got into, and when I was awake in this morning, I don't know how that song came. So I was just seeing that how much is important, because sometimes it's we think very less about what we are exposing ourselves to. But when we are conscious now, then I think it makes sense that we should not just expose to anything and everything, because it's all there. And similarly for good thing also, I'm now hopeful that it will also come when there is a needed, if I'm exposing myself to a good thing. Thank you.
Yeah, it's an excellent point also, and it's not that we're completely helpless. And it's not also that we can put earplugs in and we wear blinders so that we don't take anything in. The world is always, we'll be interacting with sound and sights and so forth. There's a whole art called yoga of connecting whatever we see and hear to a higher minded purpose. One of the reasons that sound becomes defective is one of the phrases that's used is when we see it as when we're not able to connect it to our source. For instance, everything comes from original conscious divine source, according to the ancient wisdom literatures. And when we see everything in relationship to that source, the sounds can actually remind us of something higher, no matter where it comes from. So that's a matter of developing one's discrimination, as Patanjali Muni calls it, vivek, or discrimination, the intelligence, and is able to take whatever sounds, images come, and then connect them to a higher purpose, so they don't become useless. We could compare this to composting. You say, oh, that's a scrap, it's useless. Nothing's useless. Everything can be used. It just we have to know where it goes and how to categorize whatever we're taking in the world. Look at that. Vicky's got her hand up. Good to see you, Vicky. Thanks for jumping in.
Thank you for this session today. It reminds me actually of something you had said a while back, that human nature is like water. It takes the shape of its container. And that really resonates with what was being said about raga, that when we're around a sound environment that we don't resonate with, our consciousness is very much not like the calm surface of a lake. And when things calm down, we can see what's actually within. So that helps with the going within part. I also wanted to introduce two newcomers today, Magnus and Betty, very wonderful souls, and they recently started reading the 4 questions. They might have some reflections or comments to share.
Thank you so much.
I
Nice
would
to
love to
meet you.
jump
Please
in.
go ahead. Yes.
And sorry if I mispronounced the name, but Vei Saseka, I just encountered your book and I started reading, right? So, I mean, the first thing you encourage us to do is to ask those big spiritual questions. And I'm somewhat of an inquirer myself. So I think you say something specifically about the Vedanta Sutra, where you encourage us to think beyond what is, the survival of animals, but to think about what is the purpose in life. And I'm just curious, given all the years and experience you've had, how you manage to balance those two, right? So we have the demands of our everyday life and still spend time in our daily routines to make time to ask those important questions. So I would just love to hear your thoughts about how you've navigated that in your own journey.
Thanks, Magnus. It's really nice to see you and to meet you. Thanks for looking into the book I wrote. It means a lot to me. And thanks for such a practical and important question. I find that the 2 parts of my life, one is very practical. There's physical, like health. Let's put it into category health. How do you take care of your human body? It definitely responds to exercise, sleep, a proper diet, and good outlook on life, like taking time to meditate every day. Then there's financial. There's a difference between just wantonly spending anything you get and being a good steward of whatever resources come in the way of money. And then there's relationships. We have relationships that are very important. We have our immediate family. We have extended relationships with friends, colleagues, and so forth. And according to the Srimad Bhagavatam, as a premise, there's a way in which we should be expert at these things. It says, I'll quote the Sanskrit because it'll help remind me of what it exactly says. Kamasya nendriya pritir labo jivita yavata jivasya tattva jignasna narto yash cheha karmavi. Said you should live a very healthy life. And that means financially, physically, relationship-wise, and so forth. So that you can save the balance of your time for high-minded inquiries and your spiritual practice. So to answer your question directly, how do I do it? I've looked into what are the basics in all these categories I'm talking about. What are you supposed to do with money? I read up on it. Even as I lived as a monk for 13 years. I didn't have money, and it didn't I didn't really need it. And when I then entered into a different phase of my life, I realized that I had to deal with it. It was an energy. And I took a little time to educate myself. What are the best things that I can do about it? Same thing with my physical well-being. I I know what are the basics. And relationship-wise, let's put those three. There are probably more categories, but in all three of those, I've distilled what are the most important ways that I can deal with them so that I'm doing my due diligence and I'm doing the best I can with them, with those resources. When I do that, I cover my basics and don't overextend in those areas, but just do everything I have to do so that I can have vitality in life and not be waylaid by being in debt or by being unhealthy or by having contentious relationships. Then my life becomes balanced enough on that side so that I can afford to spend a good proportion of my time doing very directly what are we call very direct spiritual activities. And they all go together well, because if I take time in the morning to do my mantra meditation, then I have a sense of detachment from everything else I do in such a way that it makes me better at it. And so all those go together, and it's kind of fun, actually, trying to do the right thing and keep everything organized. Like right now, my wife and I are trying to get rid of a lot of stuff because it just piles up, doesn't it? And getting uncluttered, like wherever I live, whatever space we have, it just really helps. So that's the directive that comes from Srimad Bhagavatam, which is a commentary on the Vedanta Sutra. Live a balanced life, do everything you can to have vitality. And then because you have that base, then you're able to really jump up high with your thinking and spiritual endeavor.
Thank you. It answers, right? So it's like, as you referenced, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Once you have those building blocks, as you said, health, finance, and relationships, you can spend a little bit more time on self-actualization. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and sometimes considering that hierarchy, there's a way in which, even if you can't build all those things first, the wisdom literature say, start your spiritual practice anyway. Because there's an uncanny way in which when you start spiritual practice, you have your wherewithal increases to take care of the more basic things as well. So you could start either way. Thank you, Magnus. Nice to meet you.
So, yeah, thanks, Magnus, for joining, and thanks, Betty, as well. Really glad you came on. We have a few questions coming up in the chat. One is from Vanessa. She's asking, once a negative feeling has entered our heart, for example, if someone said something unkind to us or we witnessed an injustice, how can we get over it and not let resentfulness to settle in?
I'm glad you brought that up because I was just thinking about it this morning. I have two responses to that, and they may be very basic, but for me, they work. Do you know the phrase tap out when people wrestle? There's a time in which they may get to a point where their opponent has them in a hold where they know they're not going to get out. And so in order to stop the wrestling match, they tap out. And the referee will say, okay, fight's over. So when it comes to difficult situations, I have this, it's a directive from the Bhagavad Gita, don't tap out. And how not to tap out? What do I mean by that? Don't make ultimatums. Try to find workarounds. For instance, in a relationship that's difficult because you're working with somebody whose very presence is discordant to you, try to find a way to work around it. Of course, the ultimate thing maybe you have to distance yourself, and I'm not saying torture yourself forever, but it's very helpful to follow the Bhagavad Gita's admonition to try to stay in a neutral state. Good things are going to come, bad things are going to come. Don't overreact to either one of them. Once things, or in modern parlance, things are never as good as they seem or as bad as they seem. That's it. That's my response. I can elaborate on it if anybody has a question, but that's don't tap out and always look for workarounds. Like the saying I came up with for myself is that workarounds bring turnarounds. Avoid ultimatums. As soon as I make an ultimatum, I'm out of the game. I took my bat and ball and went home, and now I can't do anything. I got to sulk in my room. But if I stay in there, don't tap out, try to deal with it, face it. I find this relationships all the time. There may be a difficult situation, but if I stick with it, try to find the workaround, oftentimes it comes out better than it was before. Now I've said it twice, so I'll be quiet. Go ahead.
Next question is from SG. I find it very fascinating too that the song that I hear in the morning somehow comes back in the night, even though I did not think of it the entire day.
Okay, the rest of you have heard this before. You're going to have to tolerate, but I'm going to tell you. When I was doing research on a piece I'm writing, I found out about this place in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where there's a recording studio for musicians. Many people go there to record their music. They also built a fascinating laboratory called a no sound lab. And inside there are negative decibels. You can't hear footfall. You can't hear your own breathing. Everything just dissipates to the point where it's not audible to the human ear. And the two investigative reporters who went there and reported on it, and I read their articles, both came up with the same conclusion, even though they're not related to one another. It's the loudest place on earth, they said. And also, the people who run it say most people can't stay in there very long, even though it costs $60 to go in the first place to try it out. They can't stay. Some people, they want out within 10 seconds. Other people have stayed up to a half an hour, but they've had these auditory hallucinations, sirens, music, talking, everything. And why is that? According to the ancient wisdom literatures, everything is recorded, and there's a cacophony of sound that's unstruck. In other words, it's already recorded, it's latent. And when you're not distracted by the external soundscape, then there's a way in which all of that is there. And if you ever try to meditate, you might notice your mind grabs onto all kinds of ideas and thoughts and sounds and so forth. And it's something Patanjali Muni talks about, that these are the vrittis, the turnings of your mind. And that's what we discussed earlier.
Thank you. Next is from BM Bar asking, what is your recommendation to those who try very hard to limit their interactions because of the absorbing issues you are talking about, to the point where they can no longer interact in normal situation and retreat from society? There must be a way to guard against negative absorption as well.
What do I think about people distancing themselves from society in order to avoid bad effects? Is that what the question is?
Yes, yes.
Well,
there must be some way to guard against negative absorption. So, like,
yes, there is. Let me talk about that. Thanks for bringing up this point. So you'll find that the theme of Bhagavad Gita, for example, is not to retreat from the world. The protagonist of the story, Arjuna, suggests that in the first chapter of the book because he's a warrior. He's supposed to go into battle and fight to protect the world from these really bad people who are trying to steal it. And he notices that it's going to be a bad outcome because a lot of the people on the other side turn out to be his family members. And so in a sense, he's fighting against his own ego. And as a warrior, he's got a duty to fight for the side that's on the right, in the right. They're fighting for dharma. And then he says, I don't like my odds. I don't like the way this is going to turn out. So he said, I'm going to quit. And that's how the book starts, because Krishna says, don't quit the world. Don't quit your day job. Don't quit your main job, whatever it is. Learn how to be in it without being affected by your environment. And that's one of the main themes of the Bhagavad Gita. So how does that happen? Well, there's a way in which, although whatever we take in is recorded, we can also overwrite it. Just as with computer code, something that's written can be overwritten. So there's a very powerful way in which, when you deliberately take in a higher vibration, it's not even higher, it's a transcendental vibration. It transcends even the sounds that we've taken in that are in sattva, rajas, tamas. I mentioned those three modalities of the world. There's sound that's mentioned in Srimad Bhagavatam in the verse, Tadvag Visargo Janataga Viplavo. It says, there is a sound vibration that's imported from a realm that's from beyond the physical realm. So that's really one of the main topics of the Vedas. And that sound itself overwrites these recorded sounds that we have. And it also neutralizes the influence of many of the disruptive sounds, the defective sounds that we're hearing, and the kinds of association we're getting, and helps to clarify them. So all is not lost, and it's not necessary, as I said before, to put on blinders or earplugs and not take in the world. Everything has this relationship with our original source, and there is a way of justifying everything. Justifying meaning it can become purified and used for a higher purpose. Hope that was helpful. Please don't go to the forest. I don't know how many are left forests that you can live in.
This is from Mike and Bay, who asked 3 questions if there is time. We will take one from Mike and Bay, one from the next one, come back. Nature versus nurture versus Descartes' blank slate, tabula rasa, are parallel metaphors to the sponge, also discussed in the book Being and Time. Perhaps the extent of influence versus self-determination is unquantifiable in general and for the individual. So he's trying to understand the extent of influence versus self-determination that makes up an individual.
Well, let's just go with the first paragraph first, but there is a way that we see it for ourselves. And these are theoretical, philosophical points. Various people, good, high thinkers have opined about. And then there's also our practical experience. And in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says the best process of self-realization is one that you see for yourself. And so there's a way in which, when we're able to discipline ourselves, the word discipline comes from Latin. It means to learner. It has a word which means learner. There's ways that we'll have direct experience about our own self-determining nature when we're able to follow a prescribed path. So the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, there are these guidelines for elevating your consciousness. If you use whatever volition you can muster, you can discover your free will and say, from any position you can start. From there, you'll start to see more space, that you have more self-determination by following these rules. So you get this almost paradoxical concept from the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna says, he gives this phrase, which goes like this. He goes, the regulative principles of freedom. It reminds me of a group I know that teaches about how to have better relationships in marriage. And they say, strengthening the bonds that free us. Definitely paradoxical sounding, isn't it? So there's a way in which by following some regulated path that's prescribed, just like you would with a doctor would say, listen, you're going to have to not eat solid food for 3 days. And say, the heck with you, I'll just do whatever I want. Then you won't get better. So there's a way that the ancient wisdom literatures give us this opening, say, start here, even if it's in a minuscule, there's a minuscule start, and you follow these prescriptions, you're going to see for yourself that you become more self-determining. You free yourself from the bonds of the material world. And if you bind yourself to the regulations that are recommended, then they free you.
Another question, I'll go to the next one. Kennedy says, doing the right thing does tend to simplify life by narrowing down the options.
Yeah, that's nice. And we have a sense also of victory when we're able to overcome even the tiniest of urges that come up that we've already determined, either predetermined are not good for us, or that we can sense in the moment that that's not the right thing to do. And if we're able to overcome it, it's amazing how we naturally feel empowered. And just this morning, I was doing my chanting and I was thinking about this phrase, don't tap out. And so the mind kept bugging me, like do this, do that, think this, that, do this instead. And they were all plausible ideas. None of them were horrible ideas, like go steal a car or something like that, which really never comes into my thought process. But, they're just all kinds of different requests, which are this sense of urges that sort of pop up. And my point to these urges was, I said, hey, I'm not tapping out. I'm not giving in to you. I'm just doing this one thing, and I'm not going to move from it. And after a while, I started feeling this sense of freedom. It's amazing, actually, because I don't know until I try to be self-determining that I do have as much freedom as I do. And sometimes with urges as well. And I've heard this elsewhere. It's not an original thought. Probably none of what I say is original. But this is not an original thought, but as urges present themselves as, I'm going to be here forever, so you better give in. But they're not that strong sometimes. And if you have somewhere better to be, which is one of my definitions of renunciation, we're always engaged and we're always doing something. But if you find out what's the best thing to do and the best place to be and the best thoughts to entertain, then when other inferior things come, say, yeah, no, I think I'll just stick with what I'm already doing. Those latent, vibrant impulses then shrink, so we don't feed them. And that's one of the examples a colleague of mine often gives. He said, there's a vicious dog and a good dog, and which one survives? The one you feed. And the mind has these two aspects to them. And if you feed the good side, then you can improve. That's what's so nice about being a human. We can sense that little gap we have of freedom. We can also become really entangled, and that means some kind of an addiction we get. And even in that, there's something to learn that, wow, the material world's really sticky. What I take for granted, like, doesn't matter what I do. We get this very deep impression that no, it actually does. It's consequential, the way I'm interacting with the world. And it's not so easy to emancipate oneself if you get in too deep. So be really careful. Wow. We just burned through the clock today, JM.
There is one more point, nice one from Mariam, if that's okay.
Oh, of course, please go ahead.
Eyes are more sensitive than other part of body. Maybe that's why it takes all the pain from the whole body and sheds them in the form of tears. Such a small part of body, but they have the capacity to purify the whole. I'm realizing eyes carry much more information or wisdom than what is seen.
You guys are so poetical today. That was touching. Fantastic. And there's a lot more there. Some really interesting comments coming in on the board. Anyway, we covered some of the basics, but this is my last statement. We always win with basics. When it comes to your question, Magnus, about balance, I always think I don't have time to do everything, but if I figure out what are the most important aspects in everything that I have to attend to, and I just hit those, it's enough. And in spiritual practice, find out what are the basics, what's the 20% that gets the 80% result, and just show up for it. Most people, when it comes to health, they'll say, well, I'll take supplements. It's not going to work. It's just expensive habit, and supplements don't really do much at all, maybe 2%. But if you figure out what's the most important thing, go for a walk, do some resistance training, whatever. And same thing in spiritual life too. Find what's where you're getting your traction and stick with that. And just remember, you can always improve, because the body, our benefit of having a human body, is very absorbent, and it can take in these high-minded things. And if you just take a little bit, it has an inordinate good effect upon us. And if you just let things go to seed, then you know what happens then. Anybody who's got a garden or didn't attend to their yard for the last 2 years. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, an apology about supplements. Some of them are really good. And I do take turmeric. And they are miraculous. But I just mean in general, as a metaphor, I have a tendency to find what's the easier detail. And instead of doing the thing that makes me sweat, I'll just pop this. But supplements are good. Let me end with that. Okay, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. And I'm just, I feel this urge to say this phrase that I have found from the yogis who live high in the Himalayas. And they come out of their caves from time to time with such a sense of focus and inner joy, and they want to express it. So if they see anybody, which is really rare, they hold up their arms and they say this phrase, Hari Bol, which is meant to inspire others to go on with their spiritual practice. So I'm just going to try it since we're sitting here in a cave-like situation. Hari Bol.
Hari Bol!
Hari Bol, everybody. Thank you. I look forward to seeing you soon. Keep up the great work.